Hey, good morning, everyone. Wait for a few more people to pop on. Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar on federal grant amendments presented by Karen Norris of Conoco Consulting. When plans change, amendments offer solutions. We know things may not always go according to plan, and this presentation will hopefully offer you some solutions for those unexpected circumstances you might face when managing a federal grant. My name is Amy Miller, and I'm the Federal Grants Administrator at the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, or OPR. We are recording today's webinar, and the video and slide presentation will both be made available on the OPR website and the OPR YouTube page for you to review or share with your colleagues. Throughout the webinar, please enter any questions you might have in the Questions tab, and we will set aside time at the end for Q&A. And so now before we get started with Karen's presentation, I'd like to let you know about some of the federal grant resources available on the OPR website. You can go to the next slide, Karen, at opr.ca.gov. So here's the homepage, and you can find all of the federal grant resources by clicking the link for federal assistance, which you can find under the CEQA and federal grants tab. Next. And we've just redone our website, and here is a look at the newly updated page for federal grants. Next. And here is where you'll find a lot of information. If you are applying for federal grants, you'll click this link, and this is where you'll go when you need to submit notice of your application to comply with the Executive Order 12372, the Intergovernmental Review of Federal Programs. Next. So that link will take you here, where you will submit your notice along with the SF 424 federal grant cover sheet. And all notices can be viewed on this page under the Submissions tab. Next. So back here, the Federal Grant Resources link will help you learn more about applying for and managing federal grants, and also includes links to the grants pages of every federal agency. This is also where we will post the links for the slides and recording from today's presentation. Next. And the last is our federal grants e-list or email list, which hopefully most of you already receive, but if not, you can sign up for it here. This weekly email newsletter provides updates on federal grant opportunities, news, trainings, and events. Okay, next slide. And with that, I will turn things over to our presenter, Karen Norris. Karen is a nationally recognized expert in the grants community based in the Washington, D.C. area. She regularly presents at state and national conferences and has provided expert testimony about federal grants to the Maryland General Assembly and the United States Senate Subcommittee on Federal Financial Management. And we're very pleased to have her here with us today. So thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Amy. It's great to be back again, and good morning, everyone. Today's presentation about amendments will hopefully provide you with some handy tools and just some good skill sets in case you ever need to make a change with your grant that you've received. And that often happens. It happens very frequently, nationally. So it's a good set of skills to know. So what we're going to cover in today's webinar is, first of all, we're going to raise awareness about the legal obligations of an amendment, because an award is a legal document. So if you're going to change the award, the amendment process also has to be done with legal obligations in mind. We're going to also identify different types of amendments. What are some of the most common amendments that people face while they're implementing grants. We're going to look at the steps to take to submit an amendment request and receive an answer. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the difference between prior and retroactive approvals, which sometimes come into play during the amendment process. And then what I've done in the very last bullet point is I'm giving you some templates that you can copy or modify or use, or maybe they'll give you some ideas that if you have to make an amendment request, maybe one of these templates that I'm providing can be helpful to you. So a few words. There are several processes that are common among all grants and cooperative agreements that challenge non-federal entities, and this includes the amendment process. It's just people don't understand it, they don't know about it, or they may know about it, but they don't know how to do it. So it's a challenge. And concurrently, we're also challenged by unexpected circumstances that pop up during the course of implementing a grant. And these unexpected circumstances create needs that are outside of the original terms and conditions of the award. So now what happens? What do you do if plans change? So the good news is that it is possible to amend the award agreement to better reflect current requirements. And amendments are one of the best ways to improve the efficiency of project implementation because they allow some flexibility. They allow you to address these unexpected circumstances that evidence themselves during the course of implementing the grant program. So let's talk about the legal obligations now. We start with an award. You receive an award, and in receiving the award, you receive an award agreement. So every funding award is based upon the details that are described in the proposal. This is what we plan to do if we're awarded, and then they're approved in the award agreement. The award agreement is a legally binding document that enforces the terms and the conditions of the award. And that distinction is very important because it means there has to be a formal process to follow if a change to that award agreement needs to be made. So the amendment is a legal act that modifies the original commitments that were defined in the award agreement. So amendments, and some people call them modifications or mods, amendments or modifications can occur at any time during the project period. Because the agreement, the award agreement now, is a legal document and an amendment is a legal act, certain requirements apply. So you can do some things, you can't do other things. Certain people can sign the amendment request. Certain people don't have an authority to sign and or to submit the amendment request. So certain requirements apply, and that's what we're going to talk about. So first of all, consent to the change must be clearly demonstrated. So how does consent, how is that demonstrated? Well, the right people need to sign off on it. You have to have authorized signatures. And then of course, if you are changing the award agreement, you would want to make sure that your awarding agency will amend the award document and will send a newly revised award agreement back to you with the proper signatures that reflects the change that has just been approved. So that's very important. And so often, once an awarding agency agrees to the amendment, people stop there and say, okay, I'm done. But unless they actually take it a step further and amend the award agreement, you can be dinged in an audit, if an auditor comes through and they're looking at the original award agreement and you have a change that you wanted to have made that is not reflected, there's going to be an issue with audit findings. So that's a very important step to make a note of, because sometimes people forget about it. Oh yeah, we have to issue a new award agreement, don't we? It's sometimes forgotten. So amendments are not generally used to request additional funds. They can be used, it's very rare. They are not generally used to request additional funds. There are other kinds of changes that have to do with program implementation that has to occur. So amendments also must not change the original intent or the original scope of the agreement. Oops, there we go. So now let's talk about different types of amendments. And by the way, if you have any question during the presentation, please don't hesitate to put them. Put them down in chat. Amy is monitoring for questions, and we will also have a Q&A period at the end of the presentation. So amendments are listed in the uniform guidance under a provision called revisions of budget and program plans. And that's found in the post-award section of the uniform guidance at 200.308. That's a fairly large provision, and it talks about non-construction awards, our program or research awards. They talk about construction and the different types of amendments. So the uniform guidance provides for revisions to the budget and or program, and they allow for several different types of amendments that can be implemented. Most amendments require prior approval from the awarding agency, unless the agency provides some sort of waiver. And I think a good rule of thumb would be just assume that you need prior approval, unless they tell you otherwise. Now, the next provision, modifications to the period of performance, that is a very typical type of amendment change. Generally, people need more time to complete their project. And you can find that provision in the uniform guidance under 200.309. So when an amendment is approved to extend the end of the period of performance, the award agreement would be amended too, and that's very important. It is a best practice to amend the award agreement for most revisions or modifications. You're going to have budget revisions, you're going to have an amendment called a carryover, there's might be revisions to the program or some of the deliverables. Whatever the change is, it would be important that the paperwork follows, so you have the written documentation to reflect the amendment. So what are some of these unexpected circumstances that may occur during project implementation? Well, you might lose your project director. Maybe they've moved or they've retired, or they were in a car accident and you need to replace them. So key personnel may change. During purchasing items for the project, a bid may come in over or under cost, which might require a budget amendment. There might be a planned conference, event, or activities that may be delayed or canceled. Think about all the changes that had to occur during COVID and shutdown. So more time may be needed to complete the project. That's very typical. That's your change to your period of performance, the extended end date. And then, or you might have some kind of a specialized piece of equipment that you need for, let's say, for example, for a research grant, and maybe it's no longer available, or maybe with the extraordinary delays with the supply chain, there's manufacturing, it might be on back order, or it might be delayed for shipping. And you know, anybody who's had to order anything understands that it sometimes takes months to receive something that you used to receive, you know, in 48 hours, certainly within a week. So be, as a result of those different types of unexpected circumstances that may occur during project implementation, there are specific types of amendments that are commonly used. One is the no cost extension, and that's to extend the project end date, the end of the period of performance. So the no cost extension. Another type of an amendment, common amendment, is called a carryover request. A change in key personnel, change in the budget, change in program plans, and something called change in scope, which is very challenging to do. So we're going to talk about each one of these on the next few slides. So a no-cost extension is very simple. You need more time to complete your activities. You got started late, or as I said, your shipping or manufacturing or your supplies are slow or delayed, or a conference was canceled and you need to replace it with some other kind of activity. All that takes time to plan and adjust to. So it's very common to need more time to complete your activities. So generally, there's no additional cost. You just need additional time. It's the most common amendment, and therefore, sometimes prior approval is waived. The awarding agent says, yeah, that's okay. Just go ahead and take the time. You don't have to ask for it, but just let us know if you need more time. It's generally always approved up to an additional 12 months, and it can, longer extensions may be considered as well. Now, with any amendment, even the most common one, the no cost extension, you always need to include a justification. It doesn't have to be a lengthy explanation, but it must be present. You must have some sort of justification and explanation why you need the change. So you would want to say something like, you need more time to complete project activities. And then you want to give the example. What's holding you up? Did you get started hiring people, a late start because it took longer to hire somebody than you initially thought? Were there scheduling issues? This happens a lot with institutions of higher ed and school systems who operate on a school year or semester system, you know, a schedule, and maybe the award comes in during the middle of a semester or a grading period, and you have to delay start because of the timing of the schedule. Maybe you wanted a particular consultant who was important to provide professional development, and they're not available when you needed them. So you need to adjust your schedule. Again, the bid process may take a long time. The bid process might have been under or over your budgeted. There could be all kinds of bumps in the road with a bid, and then, or there could be manufacturing delays. So this is not an all-inclusive list, but I've given you some examples to consider, to give you some ideas about what you would need to say for a justification. Whatever you say when you're asking for a no cost extension, you do not want to say you need more time to spend the money. I mean, that's basically what we all have to do. We need more time because we have money left over. We need more time to spend the money, but the uniform guidance is very specific. No, that's not an appropriate justification for extending a project. Why didn't you spend the money? Oh, I ran into an obstacle. So you're going to end up with a justification that really better reflects why you need the extension. So just start off the bat with a justification other than I need more time to spend the money, because that won't be approved. But these other justifications would. Now, a carryover request is typically necessary when there is an extension of a project end date. And the need to modify your budget typically follows other amendments or modifications to an award. So in this particular case with the project end date, the extension of the end date would usually require a concurrent request to extend the unexpended funds into the new project period. The extension of the end date isn't going to do you any good unless you have access to the funds. So you want to make sure when you're asking for a no-cost extension of the end date to concurrently ask for, and by the way, I need to carry over the budget into the new project period. Now, some awarding agencies just understand that, and they do not require that you submit this double amendment request, but some of them still do. So you just want to be aware, alert to the fact, and when you're asking for approval to change your project, to amend the project, you want to make sure if you're asking for a no-cost extension, by the way, do I also have to ask you to carry over the funds into the new period, or is that an automatic? So it depends on the funding agency. The next one, the next type of amendment is the change of key personnel. And I'm talking about your project director or your principal investigator, because this is a key person. If the awarding agency has, would approve that person at the start of the project, and if there's a change, that person can dramatically affect how well or how poorly the project will be implemented. So the awarding agency usually reserves the right to approve a key person. So your old project director may be accepted a new position elsewhere. As I said, maybe they're retiring, maybe they're going on long-term leave, maybe their spouse was transferred and they're going too. There are all kinds of reasons why you may need to change a project director or a principal investigator. Not all staff changes require an amendment and grantor approval. If you have, a health grant and there are 200 nurses on the project, every time one of these nurses changes a position, that's not important to include in an amendment request typically for the granting agency. But if it's a change with the key person, like the principal investigator or the project director, they generally they have the right to approve that, the new person coming in. A change in the budget. The most common budget amendment, other than the carryover request, is to transfer or reallocate funds from one budget category to another. Maybe there's extra salary that you're not going to be using and associated fringe benefits. You hired the project director late, it was a 2-month delay, that the salary that's sitting in there for those 2 months isn't going to be used, so you could transfer it to something else like materials and spend it that way. Or you can do a no-cost extension to extend that project so you can spend all the money and that you can complete the activities as they've been planned. So maybe you're not going to purchase equipment, or the equipment was less expensive than initially anticipated. So you can transfer the money to another budget category, like travel to a conference, or there could be any other number of reasons. So this reallocation this budget is often called a reallocation request. So when transferring funds from one budget category to another, it's important that both categories exist in the approved budget. It is sometimes possible to create a new budget category, but some agencies consider that an allowable change of scope. I was caught when I was working in the field. I was working for an institution of higher ed, and we couldn't get something came up. We couldn't get some piece of scientific instrumentation that we wanted, but in the meantime, there was a conference that came up that the faculty member wanted to go to. So we put in an amendment request for that faculty member to attend the conference. And the original budget had no travel. So the awarding agency said, well, we think this conference is a great idea, and we would have approved it had you, but you don't have a budget category to move the budget into. We're not going to let you do that amendment request. We consider that an unallowable change of scope. So I learned from that point on that we always had some kind of a little bit of money in every single budget category that we think we could possibly need. So we didn't have to create a new budget category in order to transfer funds if something came up. Now, we weren't padding the budget with extra money. We just wanted to make sure that we had some kind of a money, something, some type of funds in a particular, in every budget category that would give us flexibility to reallocate funds if we needed to later on down the line. So some additional budget tips. Sometimes a small transfer of funds, and some awarding agencies define that as 10% of a line item, may not require prior federal approval, but you would still want to alert them to the fact that you're going to make the change. You just need to work with the federal agency for guidance. How much information do they need in writing? You need to work with the federal agency for a revised award agreement. If your budget is a part of your award agreement, your approved budget, you would want any change that you do to the approved budget to be reflected in writing, so you have that paper trail for audit. Budget transfers should not impact the total amount of the award. It's just a reallocation of funds. So you're going to reduce one budget category with a concurrent equal increase of funds into another budget category. You're not changing the total amount of the award. You're just moving money around from one category to the next. The budget amendment is defined at 200-308C8. Now, this is the section, the provision in the uniform guidance that warns you it is not customary to request additional funds with a budget amendment. You know that you've got the amount of money in your award agreement. You can move the money around, but you can't. We're not expecting you to request additional money. Now, for non-construction programs, if the need does arise, for additional federal funds to complete the project, recipients can request more money, but if they do, they must request it in writing, prior approval for the awarding agency to evaluate, to consider, and to approve or deny whatever they feel is appropriate. So it is not likely, but it is possible, which is how this particular provision is presented. Now, what about a program amendment? And those often are associated with something called change in scope. So a program activity can be added or revised. Maybe, as we said, a consultant isn't available. You have to swap out consultants. Maybe a planned conference needs to be rescheduled. There might be some other changes. So when modifying program plans, it's important not to change the original scope or the absolute priorities of the project. It is possible to amend the program within scope, but it is very difficult and sometimes impossible to amend the project out of scope. Now, I'm going to give you 3 examples starting with slide 45. So if you're wondering, well, what do you mean by change in scope? So just make a note to yourself so you don't forget your question, so you can still answer it. But give me another 10 or so slides. We're going to talk about these changes with a little more detail, and then I'm going to give you some examples to help explain some of some of the terminology. So let's talk now about steps to take. Okay, I need to make a change. How do I do it? So you have to put it in writing always, and it needs to be in advance. And there needs to be authorized signatures. Now, the project director or the principal investigator may not be the authorized signature. Even though they are running that project, the award isn't made to the project director. The award is made to the recipient institution. So whoever is the authorized signatory for the institution, that would be the person who's authorized to sign it. Now, some recipients will have the project director sign first. You know, when it finally gets to the president or the superintendent or the provost or the CEO of the organization that received the award, they're going to want to know that the project director is in the loop. So oftentimes the project director will be asked to sign an amendment request, but generally that signature is not adequate because of the legal obligations of the award. The award is made to the recipient institution, the recipient non-federal entity, and the authorized signatory for the recipient institution is who is generally authorized to sign these things. So that was important, because so often the project directors will just go ahead and do it, and they don't, because they're used to implementing the project. It doesn't occur to them that that could be caught in later on in an audit finding and then disallowed. So again, you have to also remember about your justifications. Not, we need more money. There has to be some other reason associated with the project, the implementation of the project, that needs to be justification. It doesn't have to be long. It could be 2 sentences, but it has to be the right kind of justification. Then you need to revise the budget if that's applicable. If the awarding agency wants you to use one of their required forms, they may have a particular budget of, amendment form, then use it. So work with the awarding agency. Can we submit it anyway, as long as it's in writing, or do you want it in a particular format? And then there has to be clear evidence of the acceptance of the change. And that would be the authorized signatures and the amended award agreement, which we've talked about. So who initiates an amendment? How does it get started? Well, either party, either the awarding agency or the recipient or a subrecipient, can initiate an amendment, but it matters which one does it. So if it's a funding agency, an amendment, that's usually a formal notification that's going to come down the pike, such as, oh, here's your new award period, and there would be a new award document. We received a very unhappy amendment one time when I was working in the field, where the funding agency lost their appropriation. And just like we had what we're dealing with now with Congress and these continuing resolutions and the threat of government shutdowns and the final budget isn't approved yet. Well, in one year when there were continuing resolutions and the final budget was finally approved, the appropriation that funded the grant award was cut. So here we are in the middle of implementing, and the awarding agency has to cancel because they've lost it. So it matters who initiates the amendment. If the funding agency initiates, it's always a formal notification that's sent to the recipient that is modifying the award document. And then the recipient, if the recipient initiates an amendment, that's usually a request for a change or a modification. In either case, the award agreement should be amended to reflect the modification, and consent to the change must be clearly demonstrated. Again, modified award agreement, and I've said this maybe 4 times already on different slides, because the funding agencies often forget to amend the award agreement, and then people are caught unawares, or they're caught in an unhappy circumstance during an audit when an auditor is looking at the award agreement and they're looking at the original award agreement, and which does not reflect the change. So the consent to the change must be clearly demonstrated because of the legal obligations that surround this process. That means granting agency signature, it means recipient signature, and some kind of piece of paper that modifies the original award agreement. It could be an additional piece of paper that you would attach to the original award agreement, or it could be an entirely newly produced award agreement. So when a recipient puts in an amendment request, the grant manager should start with 2 conversations. They, of course, should contact the funding agency program officer, and then they should also check things internally. They should give a heads up, a professional courtesy to their finance departments, their budget offices, the grants office. Hey, we need to make a change. Everybody, you all okay with that? Oh, yes, thanks for keeping us posted. Just work through us to get the amendment done. And then the funding agency conversation, you want to test their receptiveness. Do they like the idea? I mean, why go through the trouble of preparing this entire written amendment request if the funding agency is just going to say no? So it saves a lot of time to talk to them first. You want to gain insight into the receptiveness for the modification. So these preliminary conversations would reveal the likelihood of approval. And then you would prepare the written request with your justification. You'd clear it with the internal offices as appropriate so they can update their records. You would submit it to the awarding agency for review and approval. You would obtain authorized signatures, and you would obtain the revised award agreement as appropriate. Some changes that do not require an amendment is, as we said, a small transfer of funds, maybe change in staff other than key personnel, maybe some substitution of a procurement purchase. It may be advisable to notify the awarding agency of changes, even if formal prior approval is not necessary. And just to make sure, because you want to protect yourself from an audit disallowance. So let's talk about prior and retroactive approvals. And this is the section where I give examples. So a prior approval is amendments require a written request approved by the awarding agency in advance. There needs to be prior approval. Now this is very important because the prior approval results in an approved modification and a revised award agreement. If the request is not approved, there is often very good reason, and the awarding agency is saving you from a big mistake that an auditor would not like down the road. So the denial is, what I'm trying to communicate is that awarding agencies anticipate amendments. they don't view the amendment as something bad. They generally are very positive about helping their recipients run their programs more efficiently. So, in general, awarding agencies try to be receptive to amendment requests if at all possible. So if the request is not approved, it's not a punitive reason. It's they're trying to save the recipient from making a mistake. It avoids a possible audit finding and it avoids a possible disallowance of funds. No, you can't do that. That's a change of scope. The auditor will catch you on it. Don't do it that way. Let me help you. Let's put our heads together and find some better method, some better strategy. So these prior approvals are really important. Now, what happens if the recipient doesn't realize they're supposed to get prior approval? So they go ahead and make the change and they don't mention anything. And the awarding agency will discover the change down the road after the fact. They're reading a progress report or a quarterly financial report, and they see, oh, they purchased equipment and that was in the budget, but that requires prior approval, and I don't have anything in my files that they got that prior approval. So to protect allowable costs, the awarding agency may consider a retroactive approval. Now, there are some awarding agencies and some non-federal entities that have never heard of a retroactive approval. It does exist, it is possible, and it just requires communicating with each other and working together. So a retroactive approval will provide the necessary paper trail for the modification or the change. It avoids an audit finding, it avoids possible disallowance of funds. The recipient can submit a request to the awarding agency for a retroactive approval of the change. So like in an amendment request, you need to request the retroactive approval in writing. You're just requesting it after the fact. So here's an example when retroactive approval is possible. So the proposal included a need for equipment, as I was hinting at a few slides back. The approved budget included funds for the equipment. Equipment is listed in the uniform guidance at provision number 200-407, and that is the list of 20 some times when prior approval is required. So amendments are on that list, and there are like 19 other times that prior approval is required. So if you don't know what that list is at 204.7, a good takeaway after this webinar is to look it up and to go get a copy of that list so you know what when you need prior approval. So you either didn't know, the non-federal entity didn't know, or they forgot it, the prior approval, and they went ahead and they purchased the equipment exactly as it was described in the proposal and the approved budget and in the award agreement. So it's like, well, why do I have to ask for prior approval? Because it's in the approved budget. Why is that necessary? And because it's on that list at 200-407. That's why. It's crazy, right? If it's already in the budget, you would think you wouldn't need it, but it gives federal awarding agencies like a safety net to make sure the non-federal entity is making wise choices in purchasing equipment. Let's say they're allowed to have a vehicle for this particular grant program. No, you cannot have the Tesla or the Ford or the Cadillac Escalade. You get the Ford Escort like everybody else, so that prior approval for equipment is there to give the federal agency a last bit of effort to make sure that the non-federal entity is making good, reasonable purchase decisions. Unfortunately, most of the purchase decisions are supplies and computers and smartphones and tablets, which aren't these real expensive, equipment. But if they're purchased as equipment and not supplies, if it's some scientific microscope instrumentation for a lab, for a research project, it needs prior approval. So when the agency is reading in the quarter progress report, the quarterly reports, that the non-federal entity went out and purchased the equipment, they can approve the purchase retroactively. That's a really easy retroactive approval for an awarding agency to give. You just have to ask for it, and then it provides the paper trail for the audit. Here's another example. The awarded budget included funds for local travel, an unanticipated opportunity developed to attend a conference related to the program, but it's out of state. So the project director allowed 2 staff members to attend the conference, and they included all these positive outcomes in the next progress report. They were, oh, this conference was so wonderful. We learned so much. It's so valuable. We can take the best practices and use them, in our local jurisdiction. But oops, they forgot to ask for approval for the change. So the awarding agency can approve the out-of-state travel and the conference retroactively. Now here's a retroactive approval that deals with change of scope that cannot be approved. So here's the example. A school system received an early childhood grant to provide diagnostic and medical services as they're needed for the little itty bitty kids ages 0 to 3, per the program statute. Now, this is part of early childhood education, and the intent was to get these little ones identified and evaluated, and to, if there were any developmental delays, hearing disabilities, vision disabilities, to get them medical services before they started kindergarten, so they would be in good shape once they started school. So it really was a great idea, a great grant, and the school district was thrilled that they got this award. So when it came time to implement the award, they discovered that not many families with children ages 0 to 3, newborns to the toddlers, requested services, but there were a whole bunch of families that had children ages 3 to 5 who needed the service, and they were begging for oh, we would love that, that would be so important. So the school district decided to make good use of the funds and serve those families, and they reported the progress. And they were thrilled. The families were thrilled. The children were receiving these medical services. The children were getting help. The children absolutely were helped. But can the awarding agency approve the change retroactively? And you should be able to tell by how I introduced this that no, this cannot be changed. This cannot be approved. It's out of scope. It's outside of the defined eligibility by the program statute. So the award could fund the children age 3. But the awarding agency said, look, the money you spent on the 4 and 5-year-olds, we cannot cover that. We cannot reimburse you for those children with the grant funds. You're going to have to pay for them with your own local funds. If you had only asked us ahead of time, we would have alerted you not to do that, so you wouldn't have this disallowance of funds. So again, if the school district had submitted the amendment request in advance, the awarding agency would not have approved it, saving the district from a disallowance of funds. And maybe they would have transferred funds into some program outreach, to post on websites, or to send brochures home to families, or mailers to alert the families with children ages 0 to 3 that they had this wonderful opportunity. So that's the importance of prior approval. And that's the significance of making a change in scope that was outside the absolute priorities of the award. Cannot happen. Let's talk about amendment formats. And I'm not going to give you every single format, and none of these formats are carved in stone. These are formats that I have used in the past in the field and with different clients. And if you can use them, great. And if you don't need them, that's okay too, but maybe they'll give you some ideas. So we're going to talk about a no-cost extension. We're going to talk about a change in key personnel, and we're going to talk about how to request some of these budget amendments. So here's a no-cost extension that's written in a format. This particular granting agency wanted the non-federal entity to use this format when requesting a no-cost extension. And of course, you see it's the name of the grant and the name of the program and the principal investigator and the institution and the award number, and then you have the current start date, the current end date, and there's the 1-year extension. So, and the justification was extension of time, 12 months, at no cost to complete training activities. Engage the consultant who was previously unavailable, complete our evaluation, and submit final reports. Please feel free to use that language, complete evaluation, submit final reports. These are justifications that are practical and logical, and they are easily approved. And then, of course, you have the signatures. Now, here's a change in key personnel that's in a narrative form. And it's basically the same type of information, but the awarding agency didn't have a particular format that they wanted, and the non-federal entity just wrote it up and had the authorized signatures. Now, here's a budget amendment in a narrative style. And this is a budget amendment that was for a traveling art exhibit. The award was made to an institution of higher ed, and they had an art exhibit that faculty were traveling to the different middle schools and high schools in the county, and they were presenting this art exhibit to the different schools. So they had the award number, and this was a particular form that this granting agency wanted them to use. So please describe in detail the changes, and the response was, we propose to reallocate funds from salaries and fringe benefits originally planned for the project coordinator to maintenance and upkeep of the portrait collection. Now, when they got their award and during award negotiation, they had salaries, a small stipend in there for some salaries for the faculty member. And the granting agency says, no, we don't fund salaries. You're going to have to make that an in-kind contribution. We just don't fund salaries, but we're not going to take the money away from you, put it to good use. So they're putting it to the upkeep, maintenance, and upkeep of the portrait collection. So why did they pick that? Well, the funding agency awarded the project but disallowed the faculty salary. The transfer funds will help support the portrait collection. Faculty time will be provided at no cost to the project. And then they continued with the justification. In addition, 3 panels in the exhibit have been damaged during transport and need to be replaced. Panel covers have become worn and don't adequately protect the panels. The proposed revised budget, which is pictured below, allocates $990, which was the amount of money for the faculty member initially. For maintenance of the exhibit, the project manager expects to be able to purchase 1 or 2 panels or 1 panel and a new set of panel covers. And then they talked about the revised budget. Now, this is accurate, but what it doesn't show you is what was the original budget. Where did you see the money going out of what category and into what category? So this was adequate for this particular art organization that funded this project. but it's not my most favorite presentation. I do like the justifications, though, in this particular example. So, what impact will these changes have on the final outcomes of the project? Will wear and tear on the portrait panels were an unanticipated outcome of the traveling exhibit? The budget change will provide for repair and maintenance of the exhibit so that it can continue to be used throughout the county. And then there are the approval signature lines with a note, and the amended award agreement will be forwarded on such and such a date. I like these formats for budget amendments. I'm giving you two different types of budget amendments that are in a table form like this one. So here, this one allows for a prior amendment, a column B, and if there was more than one prior amendment, you can add a column C. You can expand this. But here is, let's say, what I like about it. Column A is the approved budget. This is the original budget. You can see exactly where all the money was and what category with the total amount of award, $92,772. And then column C is the request. And you can see exactly how much money is being taken out of what category and then where it's being added. So they took 15,000 out of salaries and 4,200 out of fringe benefits. And then they increased travel. Travel went from 500 to 2,200. Supplies went from 1,200 to 3,000, and contractual went from 1,000. That's a big jump to $14,000. And if you notice that it was an equal change, whatever was taken out, there was a concurrent equal increase in the other categories. So at the bottom of this column is a 0. There's no change. And you end up with your revised budget in column D, and the total award is the same. Now, I didn't have room on the slide because this was in a portrait style and the slide is landscape style. So here the justification is funds of $15,000 for salaries and $4,200 for associated fringe benefits may be reduced due to delays in the hiring process for the program manager, with a concurrent increase in travel for 2,200, supplies for 3,000, and printing services for brochures for $14,000 to expand dissemination activities, reflecting a total transfer of funds of 19,200. Very clear. It's professionally presented. It's accurate, it's clear, it's easy for the awarding agency and any of the internal financial offices to see exactly what is being changed. Now, here is a similar example, but instead of having the justification at the bottom, they have a rationale at the end of each line. So that you start off with the approved budget, and then you have the requested change, and then you have the revised budget, and then there's an explanation at each line item. And of course, you have room for the signatures at the end. So the funding agency will review the amendment request, send a written response, and an amended award agreement once it's approved. While it is possible the amendment could be rejected, the preliminary conversations with the awarding agency should promote concurrence. And again, if it's rejected, there's usually a good reason why it's being rejected. The awarding agency's intent is to avoid a mistake. And this slide is just an example from National Science Foundation of an amended award agreement and what theirs looks like. So in summary, the award agreement is a legal document. The amendment is a formal process to modify the terms and conditions of the award. And because you're working with legal obligations, proper procedures and approvals are required. And now we're time for question and answer.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. And again, if anybody has any questions about what they've heard today, you can please enter those in the questions tab or the chat box. We'll monitor those. And the presentation, the slides for this will be posted on OPR's website, the Federal Grant Resources page. Those should be posted by the end of the day today, hopefully. And the recording is going to go on our OPR's YouTube page shortly as well. You will receive an email. Everyone who attended today will receive an email tomorrow that will include the link, direct link to that page, to the Federal Grant Resources page as well, to follow up to review this. And so far, just getting some congratulations on a really excellent presentation,
Oh,
Karen.
thank you guys.
Yeah.
My
So
pleasure.
great. So I'll just ask a couple questions here from what I was listening to it. We definitely heard a lot about the importance of getting that amended award agreement after the amendment is approved. So what would happen if we didn't receive the amended award agreement? What could be some consequences?
Well, the consequence would be you take a risk of having an auditor question. So if it was something simple like an extended award period, and now you're spending money in the new period, and the auditor only has the original award document, the auditor will disallow all the expenditures past the original end date. So if you don't get the award, you can just politely work through your chain of command and have them request an amended award agreement from the awarding agency. And then if for some reason, most award agencies just need a simple, oh yeah, we'll get that to you. Or it's in the works, we're just a little behind schedule. Sorry, everyone has reduced operational capacity. We're all remote. It's coming, don't worry. But if for some reason they don't ever get you that amended award agreement, you would work with your I can't give you legal advice. You would work with your legal advisors. What would suffice in an audit? Would an email that says we've requested this amended award agreement 3 times, we have this email approval of the change, but we do not have, let's say the last request is, if we do not receive the amended award agreement by such and such a date, we will assume that the change has been officially approved. And or whatever type of language that your legal folks would advise you. But you would want to, because you're dealing with the legal document, the award agreement, you would want to work through your general counsel to find out what do you need to do if you absolutely have an awarding agency that is not responsive.
Great, thanks.
You
And another question, I'm thinking, is there any risk that we could face in asking for amendments? Would our organization potentially be penalized or considered high risk for asking for these amendments, or what does that look like?
No, there's no penalty in asking for an amendment. The worst they can do is say, no, we don't approve it. But generally, it is a common process that most recipients experience. And most federal agencies or state agencies, most awarding agencies are understand that changes occur, and so they generally review it as a positive sign that the recipient or the subrecipient is doing a good job implementing the award, because they're addressing changes in real time and they're going through the proper procedure to get that change made official. So it's generally a very positively received, particularly if you do it with prior approval, sometimes they get a little cranky. If you do it and then they catch it and they have to give you retroactive approval. But even then, most awarding agencies, if they possibly can give the retroactive approval, they're happy to do so in order to avoid a disallowance. So no, it's generally received positively, not negatively, that changes occur.
Great. And one final question I have is, what is a typical turnaround time? How long can we expect to hear back from the awarding agency in response to an amendment request?
The uniform guidance gives awarding agencies 30 days to respond to a written amendment request. So that part is good, and that part is helpful. But that's the response to the amendment request. And the guidance language is silent on the need to send an awarded agreement. It doesn't say they have to send an award agreement. It doesn't say they don't have to. It's just silent. So 30 days for your response, that's that's not a, that's a practical amount of time to receive a response and approval for the amendment. What the holdup is how long does it take to get the award agreement, the amended agreement? So once you get that approval, and some awarding agencies approve in less time than 30 days, because remember, if you've started with a conversation, they're expecting that amendment request to come in. They're looking for it. So generally you'll get that approval right away. But then you have to remind them to get the amended award agreement.
Great, thank you. All right, and I am here seeing another question of what section, could you repeat the section that was in again?
It's 200-308. And I had, Amy, I think, do you have this specific? I have to look it up and I don't want to change the view. If you need, I can, send you the specific provision that says 30 days, if you need it, Amy, and then you can get it to your folks.
Okay, but 200-308 to get that.
Yeah, but it is, yeah, it's in 200-308 for
Great.
sure. It's just that that's a fairly long provision. So you'll have to look through. It's near the end.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great. And so I think we'll continue. I don't see any other questions. But if you do have other questions, we're going to include our contact information here at the end of the presentation as well. So we'll just follow up with that.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and advance the slides. So again, to remind you that this presentation is intended to provide general information and does not constitute legal or financial advice. Please consult with your legal and financial advisors. However, I sincerely hope that the information helps provide some insights as you further pursue your work in the grants community, or at least helps you frame your questions to your legal and financial advisors. And then here is Amy's contact information at the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. You can write her if you have questions. And then there's the website for the Office of Planning and Research, where all that wonderful grant information is available to you. And then this webinar presentation was prepared by me, a Karen Nars company, Kanoko. And there's my contact information. If you think of a question after the fact, you can email me, and I'm happy to reply if I possibly can, and I will bring Amy in on the loop with that too. So with that brings us to the end of the presentation.
Great. Thanks so much. And again, please look out for an email tomorrow with a link to where we'll post these slides and presentation. And thanks again, everyone, for coming today. Have a great day.
Bye.